There you go.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. We are Yubico, the makers of the YubiKey. And today we will be demonstrating how we support and are part of a key zero trust architecture that one would implement or is looking to implement. With us on the phone today, we have our senior architect, David Treece, and our senior engineer, David Papp. And they're really the smart folks. I just happen to be the person that keeps everyone organized and moving forward. So with that being said, the best part is I just turn it over to David, and we know we'll get one of them.
There's always two of us.
That's right.
So thanks, Jeff. So yeah, so as we look at from a Yubico perspective on zero trust, what we're going to do today is for this presentation, I'm going to provide an overview of Yubico for those who aren't terribly familiar with us, and then our basic concepts of how we think about zero trust. And then David Papp will go into more of the details around how you would implement zero trust architectures with the YubiKey. So as an overview, so Yubico is a global authentication leader across the world, where we've issued over actually 15 million plus keys, and which have been used in various scenarios with governments and citizens and employees and even just consumers around the world, where we focus significantly on strong phishing resistance, hardware-backed authentication, which is ensured that you can have zero takeovers, account takeovers, leveraging the YubiKeys that have been independently verified by our customers, not just us. So we're very excited about that, and we have a very strong focus on that security and ensuring that security is working and is easy to be used across industries and across various scenarios. If you can go to the next slide. So the thing that we're really focusing on is production at scale. I'm sure a number of you have heard of the issues around various hardware-based security supply chain issues, and we've been focusing a lot to ensure that we can continue to build out our keys, where we're producing in this slide is our 20 million keys, and being able to provide that at a scale to meet our customer needs. The other thing that's really important to us is ensuring that we are producing our keys in the US, and where we control our own firmware to ensure that we have that strong supply chain security, that secure supply chain, to ensure that it can be from end to end validated that this is a secure product. The next slide. And to that point, we have a number of, in this particular case, in this discussion, federal customers that have been using our products for a number of years. And for that is because of the level of security that we bring to the table from a hardware-backed security. Next slide. I think that's really important from an overview. So many of you people know Yubico from our YubiKeys, our hardware-backed security that provides a simple authentication, as well as we do have an HSM product that allows for securing credentials on the back end for systems. Above that, though, there are a number of things that we have put in place to ensure that it is easy and simple to deploy. Well, one of those are driverless OTP capabilities, leveraging basically we're leveling the secure. Sorry about that. The open standards is what I was trying to get to. Is that the important thing for us is that leveraging open standards around PIV and FIDO and even OTP allows it for an easy integration across customers and products, because as we are one piece of a solution that needs to be done across the board, and that we still provide integration tools and capabilities for our vendors and customers to be able to leverage, to be able to integrate into their systems where they are not really fully leveraging an open standard or needs to be put into their solution. We're also seeing the importance of services where we can still help our customers and vendors to understand how to integrate the YubiKeys, provide a level of customization where certain customers will want a certain type of authentication or their own particular secrets placed on our devices. This also allows us to be able to meet the specific needs that a customer has. One of the particular needs that we're seeing, especially during the pandemic, is delivery. So with a hardware device is when everyone's working from home, how do you ensure that they get their device in a secure manner? And so we have provided a delivery service to be able to do that across the world, which has been well received, especially during this time of the pandemic. Just one thing that I also wanted to add from this slide is that we have, or security is really important to us. So ensuring that we are properly certified with FIPS verified for our YubiKeys and our HSM, as well as other international standards like CSPN, as well as other certifications within the FIDO space to ensure that our devices meet the standards that our customers expect, and also be able to make it easy to implement across the board. Next slide.
So before we go to David, I want to see if Jeff Phillips is still with us on the call.
Absolutely.
Hey, Jeff, we have a question in chat. How many government customers, and can you list or provide a link to a list?
Well,
I'm deferring that to you.
So no, that's a fair question. The reality is we've had pilots in almost every single cabinet level agency. The numbers are, hundreds as far as they go. And if anybody needs a list, we certainly will provide that. We just would need the contact information to where you'd like to see that go to. And we certainly would add a point of contact from each one of those department agencies, bureaus that have it. As far as large rollout goes, the largest reference in the federal space, obviously, is Department of Energy, and all the labs outside of Los Alamos have a large implementation. And we have several ongoing projects and pilots going on with several DoD military branches, as well as the intelligence community, and as well as a lot with DOJ, HHS, DHS, so on and so forth.
Is that helpful, Steve? I hope so. I'm watching chat, so if you need any clarification, just put it in chat, and we will address accordingly. So back to you, David.
Okay. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, David. So on the YubiKey, YubiKey is a multi-protocol device for authentication. And from the bottom up, there are ones that are, traditional legacy OTP, based authentication, and those are great, and those provide a solution that pretty much works anywhere. But we also know that from a zero trust perspective, those are definitely being not as secure as other items such as PIV and FIDO. The one thing that provides that value, and why we still have them on the YubiKey, is that you have this transition period where some customers, some vendors cannot be able to leverage some of the latest and greatest phishing resistant capabilities. Having it all on one device does make it easier for that transition. So as a customer or a company goes from OTP to maybe PIV or FIDO, that capability is there. We also see that in many cases they use multiple protocols at the same time. Even going from phishing resistant type of protocols such as smart card and PIV to FIDO, a lot of times those two worlds are in different places. So it's important to be able to have both different protocols that can be used at the same time on the same device. This makes it a lot easier to be able to do the rollout. And one of our big concern is to ensure that the end user has an experience that is useful, because it is a higher level of security, which can add some friction to some people. The next slide. To that point, and I was referencing earlier, is that we're a strong believer in open standards, and that has led to our ability to work across many different applications and many different customers. We are a firm believer in a better together story where we are providing a very strong authentication that needs to work within these various different ecosystems and different applications that a customer implements. And a lot of times these applications are very complex and cannot easily be removed. So it's very important for us to be able to ensure that we work across the board. And a lot of this depends on the various protocols that are being used that might only be limited to a particular application. The other thing, as we talk about our mission, is that we want to ensure that everyone can be protected with strong phishing-resistant authentication. There's a lot of people out there that authentication isn't just protecting their finances, which is still very important, but it's actually protecting their lives and protecting their going to jail or not sometimes. So ensuring that a YubiKey can easily work for people in this case, not just employees that have a strong or a very complex PIV credential-based backend environment, but how do you provide that phishing-resistant capability for an end user that maybe just has access to a particular website? And working with the various standards, we're able to provide that stronger authentication capabilities. The slide also is just our commitment to be able to work with the various freedom and reporting type of organizations that are people on the front lines to help our democracy and freedom of information in the press. The next slide I was going to talk about is FIDO Alliance. So Yubico is a founding member of the FIDO Alliance and has brought in a number of the basic technologies that are built on the FIDO authentication model, which is a phishing-resistant capability. Where we've seen this is, if you look at it from a zero trust perspective, and even a number of the latest OMB drafts of their zero trust strategy, they're really mentioning two protocols in particular around phishing resistance. There's your PIV space that's used very much in the government and be able to use within enterprises, as well as FIDO on the other side, which has been designed specifically to work with the websites and a sort of more of a distributed type world where you can be able to provide that strong cryptographic based authentication for websites. And it can also be used for enterprises for sure, and that's definitely being built out. But having these two base cryptographic authentication mechanisms provides pretty much an end-to-end story for authentication that is strong and not being able to be compromised. And we are continue to be an active member, a board member of the FIDO Alliance to continue to build out that strong capabilities across the board. And back to the point of working with all these companies and many more companies to ensure that a open standard based authentication strong works easily and well within all of these other products, and especially as we're seeing the zero trust products, being able to leverage the policies that are being looked at from a zero trust and be able to act upon that for a additional strong authentication, and to be able to provide all those signals that are needed from a zero trust perspective. So next slide. And to that point, like I said, and this isn't probably new to any of you, is just the federal zero trust progress that has been going on around what does that mean and how authentication identity management is a clear and important pillar to that space. One thing that we're seeing in this, and we've been talking with these people for many years, and the industry has, is how do I deal with MFA that's now being sort of compromised a fair amount to phishing resistant MFA, where there is no way that an attacker can be able to intercept a code that is being used for an MFA model. And that's a lot of where the standards have gone and where the industry is going. And now it's good to see that the regulations and the other bodies are bringing into these important that basic MFA isn't good enough, where phishing resistant is a requirement. So now it's a lot of what does that mean, and being able to like dig into that and being able to say, okay, this is how you can provide a phishing resistant MFA, and really phishing resistant authentication as well. MFA is the area that is being used today, because you still have legacy username and passwords. I think we all want a world where that no need to have a password in place, because that provides its own level of compromise that needs to be removed. That does take a fair amount of effort though. Next slide. And next slide. So what we're going to talk about is, when we're looking at the ATARC, zero trust, use cases that we have, because we are a core foundation of authentication, there's a number of scenarios where we fit into as a regular basis. And a lot of our partners, that are more tight to these particular scenarios can leverage us across the board. So we're going to talk about these as we go through the various zero trust perspectives of an authentication mechanism. And feel free to bring up any questions you have as we go through that. But a lot of this applies across the board. Next slide. From a zero trust perspective, one of the important things to figure out is from an authentication is, how do you trust the authentication mechanism? From a zero trust is you can't, right? How do I know that the authentication is being controlled by the user, being purely vetted, as it hasn't been stolen? A lot of times computers just get a signal that say, this cryptographic formula matched, or this password matched. Well, how can I do better than that? How do we do this better from an end-to-end perspective? So especially when you're talking about possession-based authentication, and from a YubiKey perspective, a Yubico perspective, that's a YubiKey, but also from a phone perspective, if that's holding my credentials, how do I really know those credentials were put there well? How do I know the manufacturing process was secured, nothing has been compromised in that whole supply or value chain and supply chain, to be able to have a level of assurance that our customers need? And this is pretty important these days, because the hackers are very inventive to be able to figure out a way to get around all those processes. So you really have to go from end to end to ensure that those various threats are recovered or are addressed. And the one is, and Dave will go into the deeper areas around registration, because there's this registration process beyond the authentication process that says, how do I ensure I have a secure registration channel that does ensure that no one can be able to be in the middle of that attack, as well as how do I ensure that the device itself I have is truly the device that created the credential that is required for the authentication, and that I can validate that this is from the vendor that I expect. So some of these are sort of some key foundational pieces that when we talk about zero trust, especially in authentication, we really want to get down into some of those details beyond just saying, oh, we have strong authentication, or someone logged in, so we're good to go, and everything beyond that. A classic statement is, hackers don't, usually go through the front door because their credentials have been compromised. Okay, now, how do we look at these compromised scenarios to ensure that we can have a higher level of trust and assurance that will allow us to get to that a better world of zero trust? So next slide. So as we just sort of mentioned, is that a lot of times identity has sort of been onto itself outside of a zero trust architecture. And I think what we're seeing is a lot of the thought is that zero trust is really a key pillar or identity is a key pillar of zero trust. And this is, from the OMB Zero Trust strategy document that they have, and that's where they put it there. And a lot of times it can be done independently outside of other Zero Trust work, but it needs to be done in coordination. And we're also seeing a lot of the identity vendors out there now integrating more tightly with various companies like Firelon, so you have a better end-to-end solution where identity information is in a centralized place, and especially when you're going beyond just one network. If you have multiple networks, multiple cloud services you have to be able to integrate with, having that centralized place is becoming very critical, and being able to then leverage policies across the board is very important. And this also allows for additional signals that can be done. We're providing, verifying, anything at any time can be now capable and be able to done. Here, and we're just a little step back, when we talked about passwords and why passwords are not useful anymore, and this is pretty common that we all know these things, but passwords and even all the complexities around managing passwords, about changing passwords, password length, very number of studies that have been done that they can easily be compromised across the board, and hence the requirement pretty much across the industry for wanting and requiring MFA. And now we're seeing even basic MFA is not good enough, and you need to be able to have a stronger MFA, phishing resistant MFA capabilities. Don't necessarily have to go through all these particular statistics here, but we're seeing that passwords are being reused all the time. They are never really strong, or even the strength follows a very common pattern that individuals or hackers can be able to figure out and go around, and even then programmatically figure out and systematically be able to guess what the next password is if it has been compromised. Next slide. I want to quickly go through a little bit more detail around anatomy of a cyber attack. And this is why that MFA that is based on a shared secret, which would be a one-time passcode, fails, and why it's actually become very automated even to fail this. And in this case is that, the attackers will, do some reconnaissance, find an initial exploit of a user, find out information about them, really identify the people that they want to go after. And they're very good at this, to finding the people with the right controls, not just IT admins with controls, but people in the finance space, maybe an HR person as well, who they are. And then being able to exploit them and be able to basically, put that command and control software in place, and then be able to, once they have exploited them, and this exploit would be an area of being able to get their account by being able to phish them, and then they just sit around for a while and being able to find that capability on a system, and especially in a traditional Microsoft space world, being able to do that lateral movement on any account that they can find and be able to grab the credentials that allows for additional access to be given and continue to be able to get those controls and then be able to then get additional access into various systems and all the way up to an admin account. So one of the reasons why this is important is even a low-level account can be able to expand to get a higher admin access. And that's the important, from a zero trust, is that all users should have that strong authentication and be monitored to that point so that that lateral movement can be minimized. And goes to privileged account systems that are in place and being able to leverage a various number of other tools that we work with to be able to provide that, those signals that come in place. Next slide. Yeah,
All right.
well, we just wanted to show a quick demo of all this stuff that sort of happens under the covers, and how the YubiKey is being used and being able to be used in an easy way for end users to log in, to not, to make this experience something they'll want to do versus being able to, require a lot of friction for them. So go ahead, David.
I don't know if it's going to play the music over you, but here it goes.
The music playing, but basically it's showing the user logging into Windows 10. So we worked a lot with Microsoft to be able to provide that strong authentication, leveraging these new standards with FIDO and OAuth to be able to provide that login. And this is also logging in to Azure, the cloud service, but also providing on-prem authentication. So Azure has been working with the on-prem services to get the appropriate Kerberos tickets to be able to provide that single sign-on experience, leveraging a stronger login perspective. So Windows in general by itself is just username and password or smart card in that case. And you need additional capabilities to do a stronger MFA. So with Microsoft going to the next level with providing FIDO-based authentication to Azure can provide this stronger ways to get rid of username and passwords onto your desktop, which is sort of the goal that we want to get to, is getting rid of passwords, not just for websites, but also for the desktops, where especially we see that initial journey happens, that password is no longer needed anywhere. So thanks, Dave. Want to go to the next one? The question, someone just says, is Yubico separate from Duo? Thought the two companies merged under Duo. No, actually, Duo is a great partner of ours, as well as all the other identity management platforms that we have out there. And so a lot of times you'll see a number of our partners will sort of co-sell our price because we provide that strong AL level 3 authentication that may not be able to provide. And so a lot of times they will work together. And so where our following standards, once again, it's pretty easy for an identity platform to leverage a YubiKey for their particular scenarios and their particular use cases. So thanks for the question. But yeah, we're definitely separate. And part of it is to be independent, frankly, and to be able to leverage any identity platform that is out there, which makes it nice because not all customers have Duo or Microsoft or Ping Identity or others. Or, maybe they've rolled their own and they can now use us to be able to do that. So the next sort of sections we want to go into is talk a little bit more specifically about zero trust and how this ties into authentication and all the various sort of areas that we're thinking about. Because, we can say that Yubico is great and the YubiKey is awesome and we have all these certifications, but at the end of the day, we want you and the customers to be able to verify that themselves during the registration and authentication process. But before that, we just wanted to state that we also know that zero trust is very complicated and takes a fair amount of time and planning and collaboration between teams. So we know that this can be, it's a long journey, right? And there's a lot of policies that need to be set up. There needs to be a lot of work to provide a bunch of that visibility with the signals that you're getting across the company and being able to set that up. To that point, so then we'll go to the next slide. We want to just cover a number of areas where you can be able to integrate the YubiKey into the process that we have. And also where we see a strong authentication like a YubiKey, because it can be used across the board, it is a good way to jumpstart a zero trust initiative because it can be put in independently. And even a lot of the identity management pieces can be put in independently while the full zero trust architecture and planning and sort of concepts are fleshed out inside a company or inside an agency as well. Next slide. Now, David is going to go through a set of our best practices that as we think about zero trust across an agency and a company, and be able to walk through these to ensure how you can see that the Yubico can be a trustworthy model and what you need to do to make that happen. Take it away, David.
All right, thank you very much. So let's talk about strong phishing resistant authentication. So, and this kind of goes back to the password slide that David was showing us earlier, and really where the vulnerabilities are. And we see that, username, password, people evolved beyond that, going to 2FA, SMS, email. Hey, this stuff is great, but then we found out that there's still some vulnerabilities here. So we need strong authentication. So what really gives us strong authentication? And like we talked about at the beginning of the presentation is smart cards and FIDO 2. And adding to that is these devices are purpose-built for security. They don't do anything else. I mean, there's no Angry Birds. There's nothing else you could put on these. There's no malware. I was just reading an article the other day that there's this new app that looked like a banking app. It was really a Trojan horse. So when we have these other non-dedicated authenticators, how do we ensure that the authenticator is really zero trust? So purpose-built for security, and we're using asymmetric public key cryptography in both the smart card realm and also in the FIDO 2 realm. We'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later. And that really gives us that phishing resistance and really the ease of use for deployment of FIDO 2. I'm kind of holding back on PIV because we know what that all looks like. Ease of use can be tricky. We'll take a look at that a little bit. Or ease of deployment for smart cards can be interesting, especially with the remote workforces, right? So when we're thinking about, what should an authenticator be able to do for me? And, I already talked about, it's secure. David talked about the secure supply chain, and the attestation is basically saying this device came from this vendor with this set of firmware, and we can validate that it is a valid device that just wasn't, purchased off Amazon and somebody's trying to plug it into our system. It has to protect against phishing as well. So, a lot of things that we look at today. I mean, the bad actors are really using the simplest means. They're casting a wide net to try to get anybody to click on a link. So being able to, protect against that is very important. It still makes me laugh when I get pay.pal, .com emails. I can't believe they're still trying that one, but they're also getting a little more clever nowadays too, where you can make a simple mistake and give up your credentials. So our authenticator should be able to help protect us from that because we are humans. We do make mistakes. In the open standard, so we have that pie chart that we saw earlier in the slide deck was it was all the partners that we work with for different types of solutions for different types of logins. And we look at those as evolving to become more and more secure. While the YubiKey does have all these different components to it and security protocols, we're looking at this as a bridge to get us to that strong, non-phishable MFA. So like Dave was saying, maybe there's a need to get to MFA right now, but we need to do it incrementally. So a stepping stone to get there would be having, using standard access, standard protocols that integrates with, all the different companies that are out there. So one of the things that I really want to stress is that Yubico is the authenticator. We work with all these IDPs and CMSs and applications and web services on the back end to make this easy to use regardless of the security platform on the back end. So the open standard is very important to be able to implement with those. And how do we do, deployment? So what's kind of cool about the YubiKey is, think about this. If you're using smart cards and you have different devices that need a certificate, there's a cost to that. There's a cost to doing that across the board. With the YubiKey, we can use a derived credential from an authorized CMS to move that or to take that derived credential to different platforms that we need to authenticate with, whether it's our desktop at the office, whether we're working remotely with a Mac, or if I want to get in through my iOS device. It gives us the options to do that without incurring additional costs to do that. We do have a lot of use cases for mobile restricted areas where you can't bring a phone to do any type of SMS pushes or OTPs. That's going away as well. But we're also working in SCIFs where the YubiKey is locked away in a cabinet in those SCIFs for that user. Each day they come in, they unlock it, bring it to their workstation, do the work, lock it back up. And very durable. So there's no moving parts, there's no batteries. We're going to talk about this a little bit later, but there's a touch sensor on there, and it's a capacitive touch, which means it's not like something that goes click, click. So there's no hardware moving in there that's going to wear out or break. So things that we want you to think about when you're thinking of an authenticator is all of those different things. So so the identity proofing, and here on these calls, the ATARC calls, we've had some companies come in, they talk about remote ID proofing. And we work with a lot of those companies already. How do we verify? How do we trust that end users? That's part of the zero trust. I don't trust you until you can prove something to me that you are who you say you are. You're alive. I've done my background checks. All right, we're going to go ahead and now we're going to use the authenticator. But we also have to say that this authenticator is bound to that trusted user, and that there's something else that user has or knows to be able to unlock the secrets in that authenticator. So biometrics, a PIN, and then you have that public-private key pair that validates that credential. So not just the person, but also the hardware that we're using. How do we validate that and make sure that the person logging into my environment is who they say they are with trusted hardware? And to that end, we talk about remote ID proofing is how do we go ahead and take care of the remote workforce? They're all over the place. COVID has really shut down some of our centralized places where we go and pick up PIV cards and devices like that. So we have added SCP-03 to our latest version. Actually, it's our 5.4.2 version of the YubiKey, which allows CMSs now to go ahead and create that secure channel from that CMS all the way down to the YubiKey that encrypts all that traffic and protects it so that you can now provision a remote user with the YubiKey with a PIV credential. We're doing this with derived PIV through a lot of different partners and a lot of different CMSs, and a lot of different use cases that folks have had for that, and we'll talk about some of those a little bit later. We're seeing a lot of BYOD, and what that allows to do. What's on that bring your own device? What is on there? So we want to make sure that secure channel, nothing is on there that can go ahead and intercept that or inject itself into that communication. So we have that, and we also have attestation for our FIDO 2, which when we do a registration to a backend FIDO server, what that allows us to do is ensure that when we create that public-private key pair, it ensures that the relying party, the backend, knows that that public key that's provided to them was provided by this YubiKey with this information, some other metadata, and when we go ahead and log in, we know that that key is that key material is generated by a valid YubiKey. All right, so David, I cannot see the chat, so if anything pops up, please let me know.
Will do. No questions
right.
at the moment.
Thank you. So this is a build screen. There we go. So that's a little bit better. So you can put those credentials, smart card credentials, on a YubiKey. We have a PIV module. This is a FIDO 2 validated key. So we have the strong crypto material that's been approved. And what happens is the regular enrollment process, we go through our adjudication, we get our fingerprints, and we do all that other, fun stuff to get our PIV cards. But for the derived PIV, we do the certificate enrollment after you've already been adjudicated and you get that primary PIV card. So then we can go ahead and we use a smart card template. We issue the PIV through the CMS app. It then gets provisioned down to the YubiKey, and all the management of that is done by the CMS. Oh, I thought I had a different arrow there, but the CMS is whichever one you currently have. I have a couple listed here. If I missed any, I apologize. I should have put an ellipsis down there. It says ... and many others. But these are the big ones that I see out in the environment. All the management of that user, of that key, of enrollment, of if the user leaves or needs to be disenrolled, all that happens at the CMS level. If it's a derived PIV, the derived gets wiped out with the primary and is no longer usable in the environment. So almost like the straightforward authentication we do with the PIV, when you put the key into a USB port, we get a lot of questions of, well, it's a USB device, we're not going to be allowed to use that. Well, it actually presents itself as a CCID device. So it looks like a smart card to the operating system. If you're doing things like locking down USB ports, we have the identifiers to go ahead and allow the YubiKey. So you put that in your exemption list, so it could be allowed to be used. You cannot write to it. You cannot read from it. You cannot extract any of the secrets off the YubiKey. So like a smart card, but it also has other functionalities that we'll be able to talk about in a moment. As with the CMSs, if you're using other IDPs in place, I believe there's a duo question earlier, the Oktas, the Pings, all these other open standards platforms also are able to leverage the YubiKey, and they do all the management on their part. They do the binding of the user to the key, the management of the life cycle of that. All that happens on those pieces of software. So we are the Authenticator. We do not have an enterprise software piece that you have to bring into your environment to make this work in there. So open standards we have on yubico.com. Under support, we have our Works with YubiKey program, and you can see all the information we have about our partners, about their integrations, the protocols they use, and how to link to them for more information. All right, so we talked about the hardware attestation. So attestation is very important when we're doing FIDO2. FIDO2 it's a self-registration process, if you will. If I'm logging into a web service that is hosted by an agency, there's certain things that are built in there through an initial MFA to go ahead and actually register the YubiKey. So again, anybody can't do it. You have to have the account, you have to have a password, you have to have an MFA before you register to FIDO. But what this does is we create that public-private key pair for FIDO, and it goes back to the relying party. And part of that registration is the attestation cert from the YubiKey, a public cert that was created on the YubiKey, and part of that attestation and some other metadata is sent back to that backend, to that FIDO server, to Azure, to the application, whatever it is, to do the registration. So there's a number of different things there, and it's really a public key is stored there. So think about this: if somebody gets my user database with passwords, they know a lot of stuff, and they can start doing a lot of damage. If somebody hacks the back end of a FIDO server and they're able to get that, you have my public key. There's not a lot you can do with my public key. So pretty safe there with what's going on in the FIDO world. Now, in the smart card world, I mentioned SCP-03 earlier. So we create these secure channels to talk to the YubiKeys on the far end to do provisioning. We also have this concept, it's the batch master key. It allows us to create diversified transport keys And we work with the CMS providers for creating these keys in our programming stations. We program these unique keys onto the YubiKeys, and they get delivered out. So David talked earlier about the secure supply chain and getting these to central places or to individual users. The BMK adds another level of security in there that only the CMS that this key was purchased for can establish a secure channel to that YubiKey. So very secure way of provisioning these users, doing it in bulk. We do programming on our end. So we do exchanges with our customers. We do the programming. We validate that the customers can read the secrets, and then we wipe out all the data associated to that provisioning process. So we can provide all that auditing to any of the customers who have IT auditors, security auditors that need to come in and see that, and we can provide all the backgrounds so that we can do this securely. You can be assured that YubiKey does not retain any secrets of any of our customers. All right.
I'd just like to quickly add, though, also on smart cards for attestation, is we do provide the capability to do PIV-based attestation. It's not really part of the PIV standard because sort of the concept of attestation was sort of later sort of being built into standards. But we have provided that capability for our customers that do want that.
Thank you. So things are changing a lot. It's not, you used to go to the office and you had one machine that you logged into or a shared machine. Things are moving very quickly. We have remote users. We have all these smartphones that are out there. VDI is becoming big, regardless of the platform that you're using. How do we use those? We do have those remote users, and being able to use the VPNs to be able to get in and access the enterprise. There's also the ability to do systems that aren't integrated. So non-domain joined systems, we could do those. I talked about earlier PIV-D on mobile so that you can go ahead and use that cert across any of these different types of platforms. So when we're looking at authentication, what we want to do is, of course, we want to streamline everything into as few IAMs or IDPs as possible, so that we don't have all these different places where we have to manage users. If there's an HR change and somebody moves to a new department with different accesses, I have to go to multiple places. So the idea is to consolidate everything into one place, but also bringing that strong authentication with them. So under the IAM or IDP platforms in the back end, you manage that user there, and you still have that strong front end authentication regardless of their role in the environment. So smart cards, we know that they work, anywhere we have a smart card reader. There are places where we don't have smart card readers or sleds available to us. And in that case, FIDO is built on those open standards that David was talking about earlier, which allows us to go ahead and you do those, same types of asymmetric public-private key pairs. So there was a question earlier when we were talking, not when we were talking, but in the last presentation about those user accounts that aren't tied to not user accounts, they're service accounts, other non-user accounts. So how do we protect those? Those are really good targets to have, because they usually have a lot of privileges. It could be privileges to do software updates. It could be privileges to look at logs that are there. They could be batch jobs that need administrative privileges. So there's a lot of risk to those accounts. We have to, as users of systems, we have to look at these accounts and say, how secure are these? How can I make these stronger? So identify them, figure out where they need to have access, what they need to have access to. So you start narrowing it down that way. but also get away from, passwords. I remember when we first started doing passwords at a job for system accounts, then we had to start changing them every 90 days. Then the brain who had those passwords left, and it created a whole world of hurt. So move those to certificate-based authentication and protect those with hardware security modules. So along with our YubiKeys, David also mentioned earlier the HSMs, which can protect our keys and cryptographic material on those backend accounts. Did you want to add anything about HSMs, David?
Yeah, so HSMs, I think we're also seeing a lot of new scenarios around IoT, and so the world of non-user accounts is just exploding, and it is sort of a challenge for the industry in general. And the nice thing about it, so there's different HSMs for different use cases for sure, and Yubico's UBHSM is a small device in the same size as a YubiKey, which provides a unique way to be able to leverage across places where a traditionally very large, expensive HSM might not be useful, or might not be, or is cost prohibitive. So I think we are seeing that a lot of people are using our UBHSM in new ways because of that need to be able to protect credentials for non-user accounts across the board compared to in a sort of common large enterprise type model.
All right, thank you. So, and this is something that kind of leads with the HSM and also with the YubiKeys as well. So we know that the supply chain for code has been a big topic to look at in the last year plus. How do we know that the code hasn't been tampered with? That's authentic. There's a lot of process that goes in the back in the code commits and signings to make sure that's authentically, signed and done by trusted users. We could use the YubiKey HSM for that, the UBHSM. Version controls, I was just working earlier in GitHub where I have my YubiKey FIDO 2 credential on there so that I can know that anybody coming in and helping me with my application, I know who they are, where they come from, and that if you're not authorized to be there, you can't get in. So a lot of our vendors here on ATARC, we work with a lot of those that are out there. They do a lot of that background of the risk based access, what's most important, who needs information from certain applications, geo boundaries. These are all different things that different vendors provide. And we work with those vendors, again, with the authentication key to strengthen authentication of those users. So using information about, the time, geographic boundaries, what they're supposed to have access to, where they're going to, working together with some of those other vendors. And the YubiKey allows a higher level of access and privileged access. We do a lot with customers who they use their primary PIV for everyday use, and then they go in to do a privileged function, and they do that with a YubiKey, giving them a strong authentication that's separate from their everyday usage. So they split that risk apart to make sure that in case there's a human error in an email, that they don't give up access to a privileged account. So they use YubiKeys for that. So a lot of different ways that customers, and when I say customers, I'm talking about the civilian agencies that I work with, have been looking at and implementing YubiKeys in a fashion like that. So based on that risk, is is OTP good enough? Is HOTP, TOTP good enough? No. So we need to be able to step that up when based on the risk. The risk is those MFA logins in the past. The risk there is identified. We know it's there. We need to go ahead and do our step up. So current customers using those less effective means of authentication, we can help them get to that next level, to get to expanding their PIV and expanding to FIDO 2 in the future. So the future, I'm not sure how many people are familiar with WebAuthn, but when you do your registration with the backend relying party, relying application, a web browser, we're using open standards. So Windows, Linux, Mac, the browsers that are out there support the WebAuthn standard. And what that means is a lot of this is already built into the backend. So what's really different here is you're saying, oh, great, public-private key pairs, a PKI infrastructure. This is going to be expensive. I have to manage it. Well, if you're looking at FIDO, these things are all open standards. You don't need that expensive architecture on the back end to create those certificates. So when somebody goes to log in, they initially, we're going to make sure they are who they say they are, right? So we do that identity proofing. Then we make sure that the authenticator is a secure, trusted authenticator. And then we do our registration to that backend system. That relying party, the first time we log into it, it says, okay, we're going to do something here to make sure that you are who you say you are. So in that case, we'll verify that username, password, and another MFA method is used to make sure that you are who you say you are, and then you register your FIDO key. So once you do that, a public-private key pair with the attestation, some other metadata is stored on the backend server, and we give that the public key. So when you go in to do your login, you go through the web browser, you go to a portal, you say, I want to log in. The portal, the relying party sends back that challenge. The browser picks that up, says, here's the challenge, here's the origin, here's the token binding. And that goes to the authenticator. The authenticator then says, all right, well, I need to make sure that we actually have a person here who's trying to do this, and there's not some bot trying to do some attack against this login. So, hello, user, go ahead and press on this little button here in the middle against the capacitive touch that I talked about earlier. Then it says, okay, there is a human here. Now, you have to know something else. What is your PIN? So the PIN will go ahead and sign the challenge and then provide some other information and send that response back through the client to the relying party on the back end. And that's going to be a signature, credential ID that goes to the back end server, and the server validates that with the public key that we created earlier. It validates the challenge that it sent is the same as it expected, and it ensures that the origin, so this is how we prevent phishing, is the origin that was registered when we first did our registration with the authenticator. And if everything passes, we go ahead and say, great, that's a successful login. So this is done without an expensive PKI infrastructure on the back end. There's a lot of commercial entities that are using FIDO2. There's a couple now in Azure AD in some of my client base that is looking at FIDO2 and doing some testing on that. And it's very straightforward. It's user friendly. And when the user goes in to do their next logon, it goes through the same credential process. If you have a different origin on your login, it's going to say, well, you know what, that's a phishing attack, so we're not going to allow that to get through. If you have a different token binding, it tells the relying party server that, hey, there's a man in the middle here. We're not going to let this authentication get through. So it protects the end user, it protects the enterprise, and if you're using it for private accounts, it protects those as well. Like Dave was talking about the banking. So I see David's face again. I think he has something to chime in with.
Yeah, I was just going to mention just that this protocol is also FIPS validated. So with our YubiKey 5 series, besides traditional PIV, you would see, authenticators get FIPS validated. Is that we were the first authenticator bringing FIDO 2 in particular, to be able to go through the process to say that, yeah, this new protocol has been vetted to be at a FIPS validation, so that it does make sense that it can be used across the government.
Yes, absolutely. So the simple version of that is, again, that the key maintains the private key that never leaves. It signs for all the operations between the browser and the relying party, and it generates unique key pairs. It says, for each relying party, that means I can use this in multiple different environments. The keys are never shared. There's no leakage between those modules. So, I use mine for many different functions that I don't want to disclose here, but I'm assured that there's going to be no leakage of logins between any of the applications I use in the commercial space. Your client, your browser, that's the trusted middleman. That's when you do your registration, it provides the origin information, and when the relying party comes back, it's validating passing that origin information back to the YubiKey, so it can be validated when it goes back to the relying party. And it does all the checks. And if everything is correct, it returns back to you as a positive login. And the video we saw earlier is probably our best. It's hard to demo this because it happens so fast. So when we were looking at the video earlier, essentially that is what it looks like. You go ahead and everything baked into Windows there happens very straightforward from using a different platform. It is similar to the same. There are some differences with FIDO. So, but for the most part, everything on the back end is secure. And kind of that's FIDO in a nutshell. But those two methods, Smart Card and FIDO2, are non-phishable MFA. So when we look at OMB 1917, that's what we're thinking of, and looking for more guidance coming out of some of the other agencies about adoption of FIDO2. So in my space, in my little patch of grass that I work, we get a lot of different use cases, and each one of these is applicable. So remote and hybrid users. So remote is big nowadays. So we have our everyday users who are out there. So first and foremost, don't get me wrong, we're not replacing PIV. We are augmenting PIV. You still need those for physical access to devices. The YubiKey and physical access is, we have different antennas on there than what your common building access readers are using. So we're not replacing PIV, but if I'm remote, we talked about how we can do derive PIV on computers. One of the ones that came up which was pretty interesting a couple of weeks ago, was they hire people and the adjudication process takes so long. People are sitting around, they got nothing to do, and they're like, you know what, I'm going to see if there's anything else better out in town that I can find. And they're losing candidates who they've hired, but the adjudication process is too long. So one of the things we're looking at is using the YubiKey to scope their counts and use it as a smart card to get them logged in, and being able to do limited functions inside the enterprise and get them to work and do things inside the environment, so that they're not bored and looking elsewhere and looking for other places to go. The other ones we kind of talked about: mobile restricted privileged users, office workers and shared workstations, developers assigning the codes. Like I said, in the last over a year has become very important to many of the clients we're working at. A lot of code development going on. How do I ensure that those signing the code are who they say they are, and that nobody else is allowed to come into here and do any work. Mobile restricted is a big one that we see. There's places where customers go where they don't have a signal, and they need to be able to log in. They could be non-domain connected devices, but they still need that strong level of security. So we're working a lot with some of our partners in making sure that we have all those taken care of as well. I see David again.
Oh, I was just going to mention just especially for the government, a lot of employees are working in very harsh environments, right? So we didn't really mention too much about it, but YubiKey is like by design super strong. It's designed to work in very harsh conditions. So a number of scenarios, which sort of goes across many of these: mobile restricted, remote, privileged users, that they could be in the middle of a desert or the middle of a cold place or a very dirty place. That the keys are designed specifically to last for years and years and years, and that's one of the reasons why we don't have a battery in it. But we also have stories where people lose them and they find them out in the yard 6 months later, or their dog ate it. It still works. That's all
Run over by cars.
Of the very nature of our customers that need that durability.
So the nice part about one of the added benefits of FIDO in having multiple key registrations is if you forget a key, I can't tell you how many times I had a guy who used to come to work without his PIV card. We were working off base, so he didn't need it for access to the building. But you get there, it's like, oh, I forgot my PIV. I got to go back to DC. It's going to take me an hour and a half. I'll just work from home. Well, the backup plan was to do a PIV exemption, which goes back to username and password, which we know is not as secure. With FIDO 2, I could have simply handed him a new key and said, go ahead and do your registration, and we're going to use your FIDO login. Or if I had a derived PIV on a keychain, even if I forgot my badge, I could still use that derived credential to get in and do the work that I needed to do. So we know Zero Trust is a journey, and strong authentication and making sure that who's in our space, we know who they are, we know that they're trusted, we know that the hardware they're using to get in here is also trusted. MFA of the past is going away. It is being deprecated. So being able to trust that the user, the authenticator, that attestation, that the key material that we've generated is from that key and for that user gives us a really strong authentication story for many, many use cases that are out there. Again, open standards. We use a lot of the IDPs and CMSs that are out there, as well as other unique situations that people are using. And if you would like, you can go ahead and try YubiKey. There's different websites we have for nonprofit, for journalists like David was talking about earlier, for the education space. While the keys are multifunction, we can also, like I said earlier, we can program those for the needs of specific users. But we'd love to hear from you if you're using them, or if you want to go ahead and say, even our ATARC partners here who might want to say, does that work with my CMS? Does that work with my IDP? I want to try it and bring it to the lab. We encourage you to do so, and we will help you in any way to go ahead and get that into your demo environment, and you can see how it works, see how it benefits your customers, our government customers, and bring them secure authentication. All right, we have a few minutes. I'll go ahead and open this up for any questions or statements. All right. So Mr. Phillips, if you are there, would you like to do any closing remarks?
Yeah, excellent job, guys. That's a lot of information that you just presented, and thank goodness this is on video for everybody to go back and recall. The objective of the session was to discuss zero trust. Obviously, we spent a lot of time on authentication, but the foundational thing that anybody has to do to any system or any application or anything else is you have to authenticate in. So yeah, it's very near and dear to our hearts, because that's what we're experts in and our thought leaders in across the market space. So we really appreciate the time everybody has afforded us today. So thank you so much. And if you have any questions or need additional information, please reach out to anyone at Yubico. It'll be routed to the right place or person, or through ATARC as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope everyone has a great weekend.
Thank you, Kirsten.
Bye.
Thank you.